Hello, my name is Claude Buettner, and I will be the host today. I'd like to start by acknowledging that today would have been the day for Michael Dowd's second presentation to CACOR. However, he died on October 7th, about a month ago. We feel lucky to have had Michael speak to us on May 3rd of this year, our 145th Zoom presentation. He was and is a giant in his field of post-doom, no gloom, and he will be missed. David Dougherty, our speaker today, has graciously offered to speak on the release of his new book. TD Dougherty is a retired environmental scientist. He has been a CACOR member for well over a decade and is one of the administrators of this Zoom presentation series. Today, he explains how he came to publish a series of climate fiction, Cli-fi books. These books outline the lives of various characters in the not-too-distant future. Climate change has exceeded expectations and keeps getting more intense. Thus far, the first book, The Odd One, has followed Max, a scientist. The second book, The Rich One, followed Doug, an entrepreneur, and the book, The Young One, followed Hamilton, a young boy who ages into a man in an emerging wilderness. More books are planned in the coming years. None is for the faint of heart. Rather, the stories are explorations of the sorts of realities people may face as the grand uncontrolled experiment we are undertaking on our atmosphere and hydrosphere unfolds. Dave, take it away.
Well, thanks very much, Claude. In a way, I'm very sorry that I have to be here with you today. It would have been wonderful to enjoy Michael Dowd's presence again. But what I want to do today is tell you about how this series was brought to life. It started with some artwork that was done by Gray Marcuse. There was a cover, but no actual book. So I decided that there needed to be a book. And I had to write a story that would fit the title. I took the artwork, enhanced it with the words "The Odd One" a little bit more visibly, and then got busy writing the story, and it turned out to be a story about climate change. So the choice of the theme came out of the fact that it's my recognition that we're in a polycrisis. Julian Cribb, who has spoken to us on several occasions, thinks that there are 10 existential threats, all of which he has outlined. Who knows? Are there more? Are there fewer? Does it really matter? No. He thinks, and I agree with him, that all problems have to be solved without worsening any of the others. The one that seems at the moment to be most evident to many people is climate disruption. And it's my belief that we're not in the Anthropocene epoch, we are in the Pyrocene epoch, because there are fires everywhere around us. It's also my fear that if we don't solve climate change, we will not have time to solve the other problems. So everything in the book is based on what I believe to be plausible scenarios. There are all kinds of different things that happen to the various characters and sub-characters in the book. Some of the names are there: the great methane burp, the ice melt, the fire, the maelstrom, a Category 7 hurricane. There are floods, market collapses, migrations, prison camps, riots, plagues, poisons, polar outflows. It would be hard to come up with something that you haven't heard of once you've read this book. And the characters go through many different personal trials. All kinds of pretty bad things happen to a lot of people. There's the odd good thing that happens to somebody. So in The Odd One, I was following Max, a scientist. He was working in a lab. He loses his family members to various tragedies. It starts with his son-in-law who dies from kidney problems associated with kidney stones. There's a rupture and he bleeds to death. At one point in the book, he encounters a young boy. We encounter him again in The Young One. Max also runs into a fellow who's dressed up in some pretty fancy clothes, got a wheelbarrow full of cash, bills. And we encounter that fellow again in The Rich One. I was reminded when I was writing it of the very famous photographs of people in Germany after the First World War who were literally walking through streets with wheelbarrows full of money attempting to buy bread. So The Rich One, that's all about this fellow with his wheelbarrow full of money. We follow his life from the time that he's a young boy through his maturation, through to his final day, his death from heat stroke as a middle-aged adult. He becomes incredibly wealthy because he is ruthless and cunning and takes advantage of every opportunity. He amasses wealth beyond even people like Bezos and Musk, and perhaps, and probably likely beyond Putin. But he himself falls victim to his own greed and the ill will of others. In The Young One, we also follow somebody from being a very young person in grade 3. Through his experiences with climate change, he becomes a climate refugee. He loses his family. In fact, he gains another. He loses that one. He gains another, and he loses that one. He has to develop survival skills to get him through, because essentially society around him falls apart and there is nothing to sustain him. He has no opportunities for help. This includes things like the fact that he has no medication and no opportunity to get health care. So I wanted to make each of the books pretty. I went through my archives of photographs, many of them taken in the Western Cordillera. They brought back fantastic memories as I was putting them in and thinking about them during the writing of the book. I decided I would self-publish the book on Amazon. So this is the cover as you can see it on Amazon. I originally did a different cover, but I discovered during the process of getting the book up online that the program has the capability of producing its own covers, and took advantage of that. Did the same when I wrote The Young One, which is just over the shoulder, and should be available online probably by the weekend. We're just doing a final read on it at the moment. I would have had it out before this, but in doing the reading yesterday and today, we've discovered a couple of things that have to be corrected. So previously, I had put up an excerpt from the current book during its second last draft. I'd also talked to various other people about The Odd One and The Rich One, sent it to various environmental organizations. Similarly, I did a nonfiction book recently, Do Yourself a Favor, Live Lightly, Live Better. And that is available both through Amazon and on our website. So I didn't have any expectations for uptake. And this was mostly about my satisfaction of recording my suspicions about what could easily happen in the future. Perhaps it will awaken some people. I really suspect it won't have much influence. You can see through the graph of what's been happening to CO2 in the atmosphere that very little has been having any influence on people. There was news just within the last 24 hours that something like 17 countries which have made promises to get to net zero are not at all on track to do so. In fact, something like half a dozen of the rather larger producers are increasing their output of oil and gas at the moment. So we certainly don't seem to be winning that fight. The urgency of the fight just keeps getting steeper and steeper. The longer we put off making substantive changes, the more that that graph about how fast we need to act gets steepened. In fact, I'm now beginning to suspect that it won't be possible. The black line can get extended in a few more years beyond the inflection point in the middle. So you could think maybe Michael Dowd was right. We are looking at doom. And that's all I needed to say to you there, but I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Dave. And I have the prerogative of asking you the first question. Was it a difficult decision to use Gray Marcuse for your pen name? And you, in hindsight, do you regret not using your real name?
Okay, so the second one first. No, I don't regretting that. Don't regret using that pen name. That was my grandmother's name. And she did the piece of artwork, never had a book published in her name. I thought it was appropriate that I do that. Once it started, I decided, yeah, I can stick with that. And I'll stick with the artwork and produce a series.
Very good. Samrat has a question, and Art is on deck.
Hi, Dave. I'm really looking forward to the book as and when it comes out. So, wanted you to expand on who's the book for then? What are you looking at in terms of audience? Who should be reading it?
I suppose that's a very difficult question to answer. People who like fiction will certainly enjoy these stories. People who have concerns about where we are with the polycrisis will probably enjoy these books even more than others do. People who think they're perhaps on the right track to getting their own lives organized towards going forward may enjoy them. They may, in fact, look at them and say, gee, I need to rethink what I'm doing.
Right. So you mean like a lot of people, I guess, across the board.
Sure. I mean, I think that the level of the language would be suitable for maybe grade 10 up. You might have trouble if you are younger than that, haven't had enough experience with language, but if you're willing to keep a dictionary beside you, you'll understand all the language.
Okay, yeah, really looking forward to it.
These days, with the ability to go online through whatever search engine you wish and put in a term and find out about that term, it's fantastic. You know, you don't really need ever to be in the dark in a book like this. Any of these.
Okay, yeah, really looking forward to it. Yeah.
Good. Hope you enjoy it.
Yeah.
Okay, David Harries is on deck, and Art, you have the floor.
Yeah, I guess we all live in a world of influence, and the way of projecting that clearly is through writing, and your books are, I'm sure, are designed with that in mind. But it brings up another question, and that is the amount of effort, the amount of time that you have to put in not just writing it, but editing it, and all the effort involved in trying to market it. Could you give us a sense of how much this effort is, how much of your personal time you're putting in for each one of these books?
Sure. So it took about a year to decide I was going to write the first one. It took about 6 months to write it and 6 months to edit it and get it up online. There was about a 2-year recovery period. So This wasn't like some of our favorite authors. I know Tom Clancy is one of my favorite authors. And I just finished reading one of his books. On the inside of the cover, it must list 60, maybe more books that he's written. Bernard Cornwell's another of our famous and enjoyed authors. He's probably written 50 or 60 books. He's got around 20 books in the Sharp series, every one of which I've read. They don't seem to have that period when they need to be down, but it certainly happened to me. This was my first effort at writing fiction. And the first book really exhausted me. So it took about 2 years, and I finally got back to it. Instead of taking 6 months to write it, it took 4. Instead of taking 6 months to edit it, it took 4. And I got it online, yeah, without a whole lot of trouble. Getting the cover organized was one of the more difficult phases. After it was online, it took only a year to recover before I decided there was another book in me. This time it only took 3 months to write it, and we're working on month 3 for the editing. It's not quite ready, as I told you, but yeah, certainly by the end of the month, I think by this weekend, it'll be ready. So I'll be just a little bit shy of 3 months. And how much time? Well, it hasn't been one of those 7.5 hour a day, every day things, but sometimes it's been 4 o'clock in the morning for 2 hours. Sometimes it's been, oh, I got an idea, and it's been half an hour. Sometimes I haven't been able to touch it for a few days because the last mental hurdles that I had to surmount just took it all out of me. I had nothing left for a few days until I discovered, oh, I know how to get around that problem. So I find it very intense. It's not at all like writing fiction. Writing nonfiction. This is fiction. All the ideas have to come out of your own head. When you get the idea, you have to think, well, is that plausible? And go check it out. That part's easy comparatively.
Do you have a 4th book in your head? Are you going to go again?
Well, if I were to ask my wife, she'd say no. If you were to ask me, I'd say it's a very good chance, but I haven't picked the character yet. The idea was to try stitching together all of the stories of these different characters and find a place where two meet, and then they bounce off and go their separate ways. Yeah, I haven't picked which one yet.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, let's see. Ted Manning is on deck, and David Harries has a question.
Hi, Dave. I really enjoyed that. Because I do foresight, in many ways, what you've done is foresight, because foresight is fiction. Okay. But my question is about doom. If doom or near doom comes, this is going to be a shared experience. And often, certainly in my world these days, there's much talk about whether that shared doom can be influenced by the likes of our one global government, the United Nations. And I wonder if in any way you see hope on the horizon that doom can be less doomish were the United Nations to become more effective.
Okay. I assume you're known for asking difficult questions. Let me let one cat out of the bag with respect to the young one. And that is that most of the main character's experiences, his name is Hamilton, most of them are not shared. He spends most of his time, after having discovered just how bad other people can be, avoiding people. he becomes self-reliant. And he also comes to realize that what we would today see as society that can support us with things like piped drinking water and sewage taken out of our houses and garbage disposal and roads and all the other things that go with modern life, even in less developed countries, not there. Not there. That's where I see this going. Society collapsing to the point where people cannot rely on each other and they become very violent. So he spends all of his time trying to avoid other people. Now, there's a discussion in the book about hope. And I would, read the passages about it in the book and you'll get all of my thinking. But I would say, first of all, hope's just not a very good strategy. I'm not the one who came up with that, but I learned that from Hamilton goes through an exploration of the fact that I don't know how many species are alive right now, somewhere between about 4 million that we've named and 40 million that we guess could be out there. They don't survive based on hope. There's no hope going on there. Hope isn't necessary. And in fact, I would say, this is the other part of letting it out of the bag, hope often stands in the way of getting things done. Do I think that the UN might be useful? Sure. My next project is in fact not this, because I do expect there's going to be this sort of at least 6-month rebound, during which time I just am not up to writing more fiction. I hope to, although maybe it is fiction, I hope to take on a project to look at the polycrisis and what we would have to do at various levels of organization within society, from the UN on down, to tackle all these simultaneous problems. Maybe that will be fiction.
Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, okay, Catherine Smith is on deck, and Ted Manning, you have the floor.
I'm impressed, Dave. The real question I have, though, is we can write fiction, we can write nonfiction. Sometimes we can't tell which is which, but which is more likely to sway minds, to get people convinced? Are there different tactics for different people to get them convinced that they really have to do something?
Okay, so this is a question really of psychology, in which I'm certainly not an expert, but I can offer personal perspective, I suppose. And that is,
Go on.
different approaches will work for different people. In some circumstances, holding out a carrot will work. In similar circumstances, even with the same person at different times, a big stick will work. It's personal experience of a person. Like if you get caught in a flood, or your house burns down, or one of your family members dies in a heat wave, or one of your family members dies in a plague, as we just experienced, really can influence you. You might find today that somebody saying, oh, well, you know, we can all have better lives, is a real spur to you doing something. 5 years from now, that may not work at all. Yeah. And it may have to be something completely different. I have said this before in this forum. It was at one time my belief that virtually everybody in the United States would finally come around to having his or her eyes open when 1 million people died in a heat wave there. Not in India or Europe, but in the US. And it's actually now my belief that that number probably has risen to 2 million.
Thanks very much.
Okay, Jean is on deck with a comment that needs to be presented, but Catherine has the floor at the moment.
I just wanted to ask not so much a climate related question, but more a writer's kind of question. I'm always curious with people who write fiction about what your style and strategy is, because, you know, you've got all this sort of world that's coming and futuristic, but as you're developing the actual story, do you map it all out like on one of those big boards or whatever's going to happen? Or are you one of those people who, you know, basically has sort of the outlines of it in a very basic level and then kind of see where the story takes you almost? And I was just curious as to what your strategy and style was.
Well, an evolving one is a good way to answer it. With more detail, I started off by saying, where could this go? Where do I start? And I didn't map it out on paper. So that's how the odd one developed. When I did the rich one, I had much more of an idea where I thought the story would go, but it was still a question of, after having finished that little bit, where could he go next? Oh, right. He goes there. Oh, he's a very bad character, by the way. With the young one, that's not what I did at all. I sat down, I contemplated for a couple of days, and then I said, right, I think this is how the story is going to go. And I wrote down all the names of the chapters. I didn't know what was going to go in those chapters so much as I knew what I wanted the chapter titles to be. And then I wrote each chapter around what had been written up to that point, where I thought the general story should go, and how I felt on that particular day. And of course, there were times when I went back and reread it and thought, not quite where I want the story to go. So it's been evolving. It was much more structured in the third go around.
Thank you. That's really great to hear.
Okay, thank you. David Pollack is on deck, and now Jean has the floor for her comment.
I put a comment in the chat that was saying to Samrat, where he asked for whom these books were written. And when I asked that question of Dave initially, he said he's hoping that at some stage in their lives, his grandchildren will read these books, because it will give them an opportunity to see where his thinking is at that time, and that there was an opportunity and perhaps something that could have been done at one stage in the past. Anyway, he wrote it, he's written it for his grandchildren, but I will say that they should not read it until they have some emotional maturity, because these are quite dark books in terms of their scope and how people feel. It's not pleasant reading necessarily. So I'm just giving that warning.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And you're correct. I did say that I was hoping that my grandchildren might get the opportunity to read them. I would also say that I never cried when I was writing the first two books, but there are some passages where in the third book, I wrote the passage and the tears were streaming down my face.
That's because those passages reflect things that actually happened in your life too. So. And
then it's interesting because I would come back and I would be editing that chapter and couldn't stop crying.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, was to give a little bit more insight. And Dave wrote the books. Dave did all of it. And as I have said to a few people, I'm helping to edit and make sure that the timelines fit together properly and things are not out of whack. So sometimes we have some very lively discussions about things. Let's just put it that way.
Thank you so much.
I might offer one more comment at this point. I don't know where else to shoehorn it in. One of the things that I did in the young one is I went through my library. I located about a dozen books and I wove them into the story. They start with Malthus's book back in the 1800s, which was largely about population. And they finish with The Revenge of Gaia by Lovelock.
Interesting. Art Hunter is on deck, but David Pollock has the floor now.
Thanks, Claude.
Mhm.
Dave, first of all, I want to say congratulations to you. It took me about 4 years to do the first novel, The Checkerboard Club, I did with environmental research. And then I found in 4 months, once I found an editor who had retired and wanted to take it on as a project, that it finished very, very quickly. So I found I needed a support kind of dynamic to make it work. But what I wanted to ask you, I typed in the chat box. I was wondering how much you had or wanted to develop a robust marketing strategy. I ended up self-publishing and then created physical paper copies that people wanted and sold far fewer of the PDF copies, with many of my friends saying they did a lot of traveling and wanted to have an audio book to listen to. And I just wondered what your thoughts were currently about how well you've marketed it and how much interest you have in trying to develop that marketing strategy, and if so, what your thoughts are around marketing strategy. So thanks a lot.
Okay, so that was actually kind of part of one of the previous questions, and I focused on writing and editing, not on marketing. Getting it up on Amazon was relatively easy, but it's very difficult to decide how to market the book. Is not an area of my specialization at all. I probably was having a little bit more success when I still was willing to be on Twitter, but I'm not anymore. And so it's hard to get the word out that the book is there. It's possible to email copies all kinds of places. As far as your friends on travel, I don't expect that people who are traveling are going to be interested in this, because they're already showing they want to travel. They don't want not to travel.
Oh, I meant even just people commuting, wanted an audio book,
Sure.
basically.
So the second part of that is the book is designed to be read on a Kindle, which is essentially like your phone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So a lot of people carry readers of one sort or another, and phones and such. It's very readable on those formats. There are times when I'm going from place to place, and if I had an audiobook, I would get an audiobook on MP3 or whatever, and or a CD or something like that, and play it in my vehicle. Certainly possible.
Dave, I'll just share one comment, and that is someone told me that they had said that they would do online Zoom chats with book clubs anywhere where there was a book club, and they actually ended up having a lot of people pick up their book, and because their book clubs are always interested in having an author attend. So of course you can do that locally in a circle, but you can do it worldwide if you can advertise that, if you're prepared to spend an hour with a group of people who want to discuss your book. So it's just a strategy you might tuck away for a rainy year.
Sure. And I heard a radio program recently that was talking about something called Book Talk. So I'm going to try to reach out to those people.
If I can just hold off Art just for another second. David, you also had a second comment that I think is worth exploring regarding maybe I'll just let you do it.
The comment it was in relation to Catherine, I think, when she was asking how far, was a book mapped out fully or not? And I think In my experience, that really depends on the personality, of the author. People go both ways on this. My uncle was a historian and wrote multiple books. And piece of advice he gave me is he said, David, no matter which way you go at it, make sure you have your ending of the novel in mind, because that way, if you want to deviate because your characters start dictating important new ideas to you and you want to go down side roads, if those side roads become dead ends or you get lost, knowing that you've got an ending already in mind, you can meander your way in the novel back so you can stick with that ending. Now, you may get a better ending, but if you don't, at least you've got a sort of a very rough roadmap. And he said many people don't finish their novels if they don't start the novel by having an end to the story at the beginning. So that was my comment, really.
Well, that's very interesting. I don't know whether I really had in mind particular endings for each of the books, but I had a format in mind, and that is, it had to have 42 chapters. So each one of them has 42 chapters.
Can you explain?
In the latest one, you'll find out what the meaning of life is. It's math. Douglas Adams, am I hitting any?
Yeah, was that
bringing
the
any
answer that
bells
they
there,
came
am I?
up with? Oh, Samrat has this. Samrat, do you want me to take you before Art or just afterwards?
No, it's just the 42, and I think Dave just nailed it. Yeah,
Okay.
great. Yeah.
Okay, Art, the floor is yours, and we welcome further comments and questions.
Okay, just listening to all this reminded me of what I was doing this morning. And I was talking a little bit about this before we got going, but I was with the Strategic Advisory Committee for the IESO, or the people putting up the electrical grid for and managing it for Ontario. And of course, they're in a constant R&D mode in terms of expanding and putting in tower lines and wherever there's new developments, housing developments and new industries and what have you. And so they're really quite busy. And they use the technique called developing a challenge statement, which is really saying, where are we now? Where do we want to be? And what is it that we have to do to fill in the gap? And it struck me just listening to this conversation. Of course, David Pollock, in essence, said, "Yeah, have your end in mind," and that's basically what this challenge statement is all about. And I've just been recently introduced to it, and I think it's a marvelous idea. David, I just wonder what your thoughts on that are.
I'm also not sure that I have heard of a challenge statement in the way that you've explained it previously. I can see that if you're organizing a system and trying to look forward about where it's going to need to be, you really do need that. At the same time, I can tell you there's a spot in the young one where I discussed very briefly the what do they call it? The Century Initiative to put 100 million people in Canada. Well, you can have a challenge statement, but you can never get there.
Yeah. I think in this case, the lack of a challenge statement means that you get into these impossible situations because you haven't put the thought into whatever policies you're going to put in place.
That's true, but at the same time, you could easily have a challenge statement that you have no hope of reaching.
Well, I guess that's just bad management right from the get-go. Why even bother having one?
But
No,
in the
it-
context, now I'll just throw in here, I'm not the moderator, I'm going to make a comment on your comment. It seems to me that that would be precisely what you'd be up against at the end of the world like this, is that your assumptions, your challenge statement, where you think you need to go, and you get there and you find out it's pointless. As a matter of fact, that plays into David Harry's, who is the next person with a comment. Can you expand on what you put in the comment field, David? Can you unmute and turn on your video?
You can start talking now, David.
Okay. I really picked up, and I've thought more and more about it, about your character in the third book who, because the place went to hell in a handbasket, wanted to be alone because he didn't want to be with people. I mean, if we're serious understanding what's happening in the world now, whether it's heat domes, floods, earthquakes, we have, 8 billion people around. There's less and less space where people can be, first of all, alive and alone. And I'm just wondering whether, as the habitable space shrinks, this being safe alone will disappear. That will be, and I'm not pushing you, but maybe this might be a fifth book, the sort of the Hunger Games type thing.
Yep. Sure, entirely possible. But well, I think maybe the experience in the current book is closer to the Hunger Games, because he certainly goes through a lot of times when he's hungry.
Yeah, I didn't mean hungry in a hunger sense, but the fact that space.
Okay, so he goes through periods of hunger and thirst. He gets infected. He gets injured. He watches other people get killed and eaten. He gets captured himself. He watches people get turned into diesel fuel. There's a lot of dark stuff, as Gene said. And what comes out of this? He learns. What does he learn? Stay the hell away from most people. Because at that point, it's like when they did experiments back in the 50s, I think, with rats. Okay, you put one rat in a cage, he's okay. Put two rats in the same cage, yeah, they're okay. By the time you got 8 or 9 rats in there, you come back the next morning and some of them are dead.
That's right. Yeah. So space is salvation.
Yeah, and there's probably one cowering in the corner.
Smart.
Just trying to stay the hell out of the way and let the other guys kill them all.
David, are you still online? I don't see where oh yeah, he did leave. He left. He knew he was going to have to leave, but I'm just going to read his comments so we have a lot of time here. Thanks, Dave. I'll seek your work. Maybe you'd like a copy of my work, The Checkerboard Club, an international thriller with a focus on solid research around global population. Oh, there's a love story embedded in the general audience. Cheers. But need to leave shortly. So thank you. And then the next person, I don't see a hand up. Jean would like to make a comment.
Another one, David, in terms of the young one, Hamilton finds himself alone, not necessarily by choice, but the way things worked out in the story, he ended up alone. And so it wasn't necessarily by choice. And certainly even through to the end of the book, it wasn't that he was necessarily looking for other people, but he learned to be very wary of certain types of people. I'll put it that way. So it's choosing to be alone is not quite how I would phrase it, but you have to read the book to find out.
Yeah. Also, Hamilton wanted human company, but came to realize that getting it was too risky.
So now I'm back to being a participant, and I'll say that I'm going to gush a little bit. I really enjoyed that your environmentalist background was showing, and this was not like the normal Cli-fi. I haven't read that many, but it's an emerging, burgeoning perhaps genre, which has yet to hit the mainstream. A few exceptions. The Ministry for the Future, of course, I think is very famous and very ambiguously ended, whereas you have the courage to say, no, this is where we're headed. And I think that that's the other thing that I find so interesting about these conversations and these stories. What part of the unraveling are you involved with? So I run up and down, what happens when people suddenly realize that, it's time to hoard, and there's an old guy there that can't take care of himself. I'm going to, see what he has stored away. But then later on, and in the beginning, 911 still works because they're on a microgrid. Thank you, Art Hunter. And the water for a time is still potable for a time. And at some point, things fall apart, and the people who we think of as first responders decide that it's better to go with their families and become the local warlord themselves rather than go after them. And so that's what I appreciate about your multiple perspectives. So with that as a huge compliment that's too wordy, actually, I'm going to make a suggestion that the fourth one be about a woman, partly because that will get Gene involved as a co-writer, the woman's point of view. And what I'm thinking of is Reese actually suggests this. He says there's never been an agrarian society that hasn't had an underclass. And he even hints that we're headed back towards some form of slavery or indentured servitude. And you look at history and, maybe he's got a really strong point. I'm interested in, would there be the warrior mother who feels just like your character in the young one? She'd like a family, but in the meantime, she has a child to protect. It's almost like the wild animals. Keep the father dog away from the litter until they get big enough so that he can recognize them as dogs, because he might see them as threats and kill them all, because that's what mammals do. And so I'll just invite your comments on that suggestion. And don't take my suggestion. I'm not an editor.
Well, of course, I think my first major challenge was probably mentioned by David Pollock before he had to leave, marketing these books. So I'm going to have to put my mind to that first before I decide on a fourth one, because there's a lot of effort involved. It does give me something to occupy my time other than this Zoom series. So there's an advantage to that. Keeps me out of Gene's hair sometimes. Yeah, I have no problem with attempting to write it from a woman's perspective. In fact, especially in this latest book, there are several major characters who are women who do get developed. Not enough to be the focus of a book yet, but certainly possible. Even before going to that kind of stance, I think I might want to address what might happen to somebody in a different venue than North America, because all three of these books happen in North America.
Bravo. Gene, do you have another comment, or are you there as our president?
No, I'm there. I'm here to make a comment.
Okay.
It's going to be a long time before I'm willing to sit down and write a book. I certainly have been giving Dave suggestions and comments, but writing a book, I don't, it'll be a while before something like that happens for me. Anyway, just as an aside.
And Samrat has his hand up. Samrat, what have you got?
Yeah, more than a question, I'm really glad that Jean clarified it a little while ago that maybe children or teenagers should wait a little while before they read this book. So in context of that, Dave, since I'm always thinking in terms of visuals, is it not then possible to say the story of your book, let's say, in another medium, which could be visuals or something like that, you know? What do you think about it?
Well, the whole thing could be turned into a screenplay. That's what you mean.
Exactly. It's another medium, but it's the same story. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have the expertise to do that, despite the
Yeah,
fact that
I didn't
I'm
mean
in the
that,
movie.
but I'm saying, are you open to the idea? That's what I meant, actually. But
Right.
it also makes me think of what Jean said, that one has to be careful when the person would read it. So it kind of makes me feel that when I had read books by Kurt Vonnegut, when I was like 20 or 21, I thought the guy was crazy, but his books were very, very good, you know, whatever age that I might have read it in. So is that
Well,
the case with
I ran
your
into
book?
Vonnegut at about age 18.
Yeah,
I mean, kids can run into books virtually any time if there isn't a parent there looking over his or her shoulder. One of the scariest things you can ever do is to open up the Bible.
yeah.
Do you want to explain that one? Read for content so that you discover that it's not quite the way you were told?
No,
Well,
yeah,
no,
I get
I mean,
I get the irony of getting the Bible by mistake. But yeah,
Well, I mean,
thanks, Dave. So then, like, the story can be told in many ways.
it's a very scary story.
I'll add into this because we've had this discussion many times, my husband and I, and in particular, the Old Testament has a lot of very violent issues that they talk about and things that happen. And so the Old Testament in particular is one that is not for the faint of heart. There are some lovely stories in there, but there are also some very scary ones.
Yeah, it's the first documentation of a case of genocide.
Okay, so we're talking now. If you just allow me one little thing to say, and then let's move on, because I'm sure others have to say something. Isn't like a lot of Hollywood movies already doing that? You know, it's full of really strange, unreal, violent things, which whatever children are privy to as is. You know.
You can even find them in cartoons and Disney movies. And
exactly. Yeah. Thanks for saying that.
You can find very scary stuff in lots of different places. So, I mean, is it appropriate for somebody who's, say, 12 years old to be reading something like this? Well, I'm not convinced that he isn't already getting exposed. If a young girl at age 10 or 12 is watching the news, there's all kinds of stuff that shows, you know, pictures of people trying to climb out of their cars as they get swept away in a river.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Actually, I remember, geez. Well, certainly before I was out of high school, I remember seeing pictures that had come from, I guess it was East Pakistan at the time. They had an enormous storm with a big storm surge, and there were something like 200,000 people killed. And there were bodies all over the place and all kinds of film of it. Heck, when I was in high school, I watched film of the Vietnam War, people bleeding out all over the place. Fragments of bodies in trees and stuff.
Oh, what pleasant
Okay.
things we've decided to talk about here. I'm going to, since there's no one that seems to be in line here, I'm going to throw in an idea or two. I have two gentlemen as acquaintances who are the Navy guys, and they make action thrillers. They both have a nuclear Navy background, actually. And so their audience is the people, a lot of them are already in or have been in the military and who love action films. Clancy-esque is the highest compliment that they feel when people make comparisons that way. And he sends out newsletters. So one of the things you could do if you have a website for the books is to put out a weekly, have people sign up, and then
tell them how the next project is going, or where you're going to be discussing your book if you wind up on Zooms. And one of the things that they shared was their total surprise, because they didn't do it. They didn't listen to audiobooks. But the early adopters said, you must put all of your novels on audiobooks. There's a different audience. And I haven't got the habit yet, but I have a cousin who that's all she does. She doesn't read anymore. She just listens to audiobooks while she's running. And so I'm going to pass that on to you. Is that, and the other thing is a tag team, and I'm thinking of you and Gene actually, is that one guy thinks of the technology and the way it's going to work in politics. And they've been very prescient, because 2 books ago they did the invasion of Taiwan by China. And the next book that was at the editors when Putin went into Ukraine was about the invasion of Ukraine. So, these guys have got their finger on the pulse. And so I'll just suggest to you that you need to partner, find someone, either an individual or someone who does it as a business, depending on how much money you want to throw at it, to make these into audiobooks. And you might be surprised at what a wider audience you are going to reach with that kind of media.
Yeah, while you were talking about that, I was reminded of the fact that I already have technology in my phone and my computer that will read a book to me.
Yes,
I get all the words right.
Yeah, but having someone, for example, Michael Dowd was always very proud that he got permission to do Overshoot, his favorite book, and he actually used his beautiful radio voice to make an audiobook out of that. And that's what you don't get when you have the machine do it. You have the apology that we may not get everything right. And yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts that way rather than read while I'm doing emails on the side. Bob Esty has a comment. Bob, you want to come on mic and turn on your video, and you can start talking immediately, because that seems to connect right away. And tell us about your comment.
I think he's left.
Bob, are you there? Oh, I'm sorry, he left. So I'm going to thank you, Dave. It's great to learn about how you are putting all this together. I'll be in touch directly with you about self-publishing and all that is merging from that. Good stuff. And thanks to everyone else. This is have been my second CACOR Zoom meeting. I'm continuing to digest it all, and I'm looking forward to many of the others on our lineup. Best wishes onward. Cheers, Bob Esty. So you are experiencing people that have crawled out of obscurity to connect with you, Dave, and I wish you a very good success with this. I don't see a hand up. I don't see any more comments. I've made the comments that I wanted to make. Does anyone else out there have anything they want to just blurt out before I turn it over to Ted, who is now our chairman?
Thank you, Claude. I've known Dave for a very long time, including wandering to crazy places around the world with him. And I always considered him to be the strongest analyst I'd ever worked with. And now I'm discovering that he is actually a creative individual as well. And it's kind of an oxymoron when you put both of them together. So I congratulate you immensely for translating sending the facts and translating them into emotions and impacts. I think this was a very good discussion. I think we need to explore the need for other vehicles and other ways of getting ideas out to people and to make them pay attention. So I'd like to give the thanks from CACOR and all of us. We are putting on weekly ones, and they are always interesting. And I forgot to look who's on next week. Art, who's the next one?
Peter Carter.
That's
Okay,
right.
because I'm trying to do the advertisement for the next one. And the advertisement is, please stay in touch. Please join CACOR if you are able. and certainly stay in touch with us for the interesting presentations that are coming up over the next while. And we're going to try something a bit special for the 200th presentation this summer. And we're soliciting suggestions on just what that ought to be. So thank you very much for showing up, and we will see you again soon.